Time for another retro film classic review, and today I'm taking us back to 1966. Now I'm sure, as people of a certain generation and certain age, we all agree that Gerry Anderson was one of the great creative visionaries of the 1960s. I've spoken about him before. Haven't done that many videos about his shows. I do intend to rectify that in the coming months. He created an incredible body of work through the 60s, series after series after series. And every series, he developed his supermarionation puppet technique from the early days of things like Torchy the Battery Boy and Twizzle to things like Four Feather Falls, Fireball XL5, getting more sophisticated then with Stingray, reaching his apotheosis, his classic show. And I think we'll all agree that his best show in the 1960s, one of his best shows of his entire career, was Thunderbirds. And if you don't agree with me, I will take you on big as you are. But Gerry always wanted to make feature films. In fact, that's how he started his career, working on feature films. His first director's credit, in fact, was a little regarded crime thriller called Crossroads to Crime. But in the 60s, he really wanted to make live action shows and films, and he wanted to go onto the big screen. And in 1965, he got the chance. Thunderbirds had been a huge success in the UK. Hadn't really made a big breakthrough abroad. Lou Grade, as I think I've mentioned before, was always keen to get his shows, these big budget film shows, onto American networks. That was so difficult to do back then. Thunderbirds, however, had a certain amount of success. So it was decided that a feature film would be bankrolled, costing $250,000, about $6 million by today's standards. So quite a low budget film, but a feature-length extravaganza based on Gerry's current show. Thunderbirds Are Go. So let's take a look at this extraordinary but rather bizarre 1960s sci-fi puppet thriller. 5, 4... Welcome back, my name is Paul Lamount. How the devil are you? I hope you're well. If you're new here, and you may well be, why not click that subscribe button? Subscribers now hovering around the 2,100 mark. Marvellous news, but it'd be even better to get even higher. So if you're new, because you've seen some Thunderbird stuff and you like a bit of Gerry Anderson, there will be more stuff of that nature on this channel, and there's a couple of things further back down the line. So click the subscribe button, click a like button, leave a comment down below, and we'll all talk about Gerry Anderson stuff together. 1966 then, Gerry Anderson launched his first big budget supermarionation feature film, Thunderbirds Are Go. Thunderbirds had launched in 1965, been a huge success on the domestic market. I will talk a little bit more about how it impacted me as a year-old at the time. But it hadn't been a massive hit in America, but it was felt that this was a show which had a lot of potential. There'd been a 26-episode first series and a 6-episode second series, as it turned out, was just going into production. It was decided that there was potential for Thunderbirds to really be blown up onto the big screen as a big budget, lavish, adventure science fiction film for all the family. So Gerry and his then wife Sylvia Anderson, and I'm giving her credit there, you notice, they went to their holiday home in Portugal and they worked up a scenario and a script for what would be Thunderbirds Are Go. An opposite title, because that was a sort of a catchphrase from the series when the Thunderbirds craft launched from their secret base on Tracy Island. Thunderbirds Are Go tended to be the catchphrase that sent them all off on their adventures. You don't need me to tell you what Thunderbirds is about, I take it. It's adventures of the International Rescue Organisation, funded by this multimillionaire ex-astronaut and philanthropist, who with his sons, who are all named after legendary American astronauts, pilot a fleet of craft which head to scenes of disaster and destruction with the intent of saving lives. That's Thunderbird, but you all know that. Feature film had to be something slightly different, however. It was a rescue, but on a slightly different scale. Once Gerry and Sylvia had got the script sorted out, the film went into production at Century 21's studios on the Slough trading estate. And it's quite funny thinking about it. When I was a kid, and I think this was probably around the time when I began to realise that Gerry Anderson had been responsible for Stingray and Fireball and Supercar, which I'd watched when I was even younger. And I'd come to learn that these things were made in Slough. And at the time, for me, Slough was like Hollywood. Slough was this incredible mystical place where magic took place and these fantastic adventures were created. Of course, Slough isn't quite like that, as we now know. But it was something mystical about, the fact that somewhere in the UK, not that far away from me, near London, people were making these extraordinary television films, and there was always a certain magic about the idea of Slough and these studios. I think Stirling Road was one of the first studios, and I've seen photographs and images, and I've seen a documentary, and it's tragic. One of the studio complexes no longer exists, and it's just a shame that, as I've often said, that Gerry Anderson and Sylvia Anderson aren't regarded as Britain's Disney. They should be. There should be plaques, there should be theme worlds, there should be parks where you can go to celebrate this stuff, but that's the way of British culture, unfortunately. But the film went into production between March and June. The lavish special effects sequences, which were created by Derek Meddings, they took another 6 months to perfect, really. So the film was finally ready for release in December 1966, and it was expected to be a big blockbuster film over the Christmas period and into the new year. The film then, if you've not seen it, and I watched it again yesterday, and it's great fun, but it's not without its problems. It starts off at Glenfield, sort of a NASA airbase somewhere in America, where a huge spaceship called Zero X is being readied for a flight to Mars. It's a massive piece of kit, a classic Derek Meddings design, a sort of an H-shaped spaceship with these great wings, nose cone, a module that detaches from the main ship. And it moves across the Glenfield runways being put together to this backdrop of this rousing martial theme by the great Barry Gray, of course, who did the Thunderbirds theme music and most of Gerry Anderson's classic tunes. This is one of the first problems with the film. This is a fantastic scene. It's majestic. It's Super Mario Nation porn in a way, as you see this great model beautifully filmed moving across the runway and being put together and assembled, and all these different views of this. It's beautiful. But it goes on for about 10 minutes. It's a very odd way to start a film with no human or relatable characters, a pure model. And I suppose that's the essence of what so much of Gerry's work was, glorifying these fantastic effects. But this scene just goes on and on and on. This 10-minute scene, it's very laboured, to say the least. And you wouldn't make a film like that these days. You wouldn't have a 10-minute effects scene. It's like watching a film that has a 10-minute CGI sequence. Now, you wouldn't do it. You have to have something to break it up, some human angle. But anyway, eventually the sort of scene moves on that the ship is put together and we meet the crew who go on board. Meanwhile, we discover that International Rescue's old enemy, the Hood, this mysterious, slightly racist oriental figure, is in the hold of the ship trying to sabotage. We never find out why. We never find out who's paying for him to go there or why he's doing this. He's just sabotaging this machine. As the ship takes off, it's quite a gruesome scene, actually. The Hood gets his foot trapped between these two pneumatic sort of plates that are coming together. His foot is being squashed. He pulls his foot free, and you actually see his sock with blood over it. It's quite graphic for a kid's film with a cast of puppets to see one with his foot damaged. But because his boot is trapped in there, these two plates can't join together. It compromises the ship, which plunges out of control. The crew escape, and the ship crashes into the sea and explodes. We jump forward 2 years now. Bear in mind, we haven't seen anybody from International Rescue yet. We're nearly 20 minutes in. There's a huge meeting that decides that a second Zero X mission should be launched. But this time they decide that they're going to invite International Rescue to come along and give them some assistance at this early stage. Then we go to Tracy Island, and after about 22 minutes, we're finally reunited with Jeff Tracy and the International Rescue boys. And Jeff has been approached to help with the initial launch of Zero X, so it gets freely out of Earth's atmosphere. Jeff is uncertain. He thinks that International Rescue's business is rescuing people. But in the end, he decides to give assistance, and we have those glorious launch sequences with Thunderbird 1 taking off from the pool, Thunderbird 2, the big lumbering green beast of burden of the Thunderbird fleet, launching out from its mountainside pad, and Thunderbird 3, the spaceship, which launches from the Sun House. And the Thunderbirds are go, and it's great. And I think these are new film sequences as well. In the TV series, notoriously, when you watch them now, you notice that every episode has the same sequences of the craft lifting off, because they filmed them once and just reused the same scenes. Why wouldn't you? But in this film, they did some new effect scenes of the ships taking off, and they look beautiful. I mean, these are such iconic retro machines. They absolutely look stunning and look beautiful. They take your breath away. With the help of International Rescue, Zero X launches. There is another sabotage attempt by the Hood, which is foiled by Lady Penelope Crichton-Ward, voiced of course by Sylvia Anderson, and her, God blimey, governor, chauffeur Parker, voiced by David Graham. They foil another attempt by the Hood to sabotage Zero X Mark II, but they chase him away from the airfield. He tries to escape on a sort of a hovercraft. There's a fantastic scene with Fab 1, which is of course Lady Penelope's incredible, iconic pink Rolls Royce, plunging into the water after this hoverboat. Hydrofoils emerge, so it skims across the water, and then they machine gun the Hood to death and blow up his hydrofoil. Well, so we think, because he's not, because he's back in the next film. Zero X travels to Mars. 3 months later, it arrives on Mars, and the Martian module detaches from the bulk of Zero X and travels down to the surface of Mars. Here's a model of the module. This is, in fact, a bit of a cheat. This is a Martian exploration vehicle. This actually was the same model that was repurposed for use in the first episode of Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, which came out a couple of years later. And I will go back a bit later on to that strange sort of crossover and the extended life that Zero X had beyond this particular film. So this model came out, this was released by Anderson Entertainment a few years ago. It's just a nice little piece of memorabilia. So, the Martian module lands on Mars, and it's a very well put together scene with, again, very creepy, sort of eerie background music from Barry Gray as this thing is creeping its way across the Martian surface. And then, in a scene which is still incredibly effective, they notice these coils of rock up on the mountainside. And they're already talking about Mars might possibly harbour some sort of life form. And this, of course, is back in the 60s when we didn't know about the other planets in our galaxy as we do today. We know now that Mars is uninhabited. But back then, there was a genuine feeling that Mars, of all the planets, could be one that could harbour some sort of life form. In this film, it does. When these snakes start to uncurl into these uncanny, weird-looking rock creatures with one glowing eye that spits out fire and sparks and flames. The Martian vehicle heads back and manages to escape, and it's an exciting scene. It's the most exciting scene in the film. And it's interesting because it's the first time I think that the Thunderbirds world had been involved with aliens, because Thunderbirds as a series was very much about collapsing buildings and bridges and huge machines overturning. It was about people in peril on Earth. Didn't really dabble with the extraterrestrial much. It was quite interesting that in the Thunderbirds universe, the first alien thing is in this film. But these rock snakes look incredible. They're a fantastic piece of animation. And it's a really exciting scene as they're spitting these sparks. The module gets back to the main body of the ship. They head back towards Earth, but something goes wrong on re-entry, and the ship is out of control and heading towards a town called Craigsville, a heavily populated town, and it looks as if it's going to crash into this town and destroy everybody. The National Rescue are on scene fairly quickly. Although the Zero X crashes, the crew are saved. It's a good fun film. Watching it now, you're aware of the fact that it's a thing for the 60s. The colours are fantastic, it looks vibrant, it looks brilliant. But the pace of it is very, very measured and very slow. For a very simple story of space exploration, it takes a long time to really build up any sort of momentum. But yeah, watching it yesterday, it didn't seem to drag. It's 93 minutes long, and it really sort of popped along. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that the pace isn't great and that the script is quite flat in terms of character. There's no character development really for the astronauts aboard the spaceships. There's a bit of fun to be had with the Tracys themselves. Gordon, of course, who was always my favourite. He was the pilot of the little yellow submarine Thunderbird 4, which very rarely got used. He's a bit frustrated at being left out of the original mission, and he's really excited. He's told to join up for the mission to rescue the Zero X as it returns into the Earth's atmosphere. There's a very odd sequence, of course, right in the middle of the film. This is a bit of an indulgence, and Sylvia Anderson herself admitted that this was a massive piece of indulgence, because when they were in Portugal writing the script, their neighbours included Cliff Richard and Bruce Welch from The Shadows, the guitar band who supported Cliff through many of his early hits. They'd agreed to participate in the film to some extent. So you get this very odd sequence, about 10, 12 minutes, smack in the middle of the film. And I suppose it's a bit of respite before the drama ratchets up in the second half of the film. But Zero X is headed off towards Mars to celebrate the successes of their mission. Lady Penelope invites Scott and Virgil for a night out, the mind boggles, at a nightclub called the Shooting Star. Alan Tracy, who's brought Thunderbird 3 back down to Earth, he's a bit miffed at being left out of this because he's the youngest member of the group. He flounces off to bed and he has a dream that he's going to the Shooting Star nightclub with Lady Penelope. But the Shooting Star is out in space. It's a huge space station nightclub with 1 million parking spaces, I noticed, which is a nice little gag. And he's there with Lady Penelope and all her finery, and Cliff Richard and the Shadows. Cliff Richard Jr., yeah, right, and the Shadows are playing live at this nightclub, and they do this musical number called Shooting Stars, which is a very 60s sort of beat combo guitar tune. And you watch it and it's quite surreal. And I know that, as I said, Sylvia Anderson herself said it was incredibly indulgent. That not something they would have done on the TV show for budgetary reasons, but here they had the money. They wanted to do a musical interlude. Cliff Richard was a big star at the time, as he still is, in fact. But it's very weird. When you watch it now, it's almost psychotropic. You sort of think they must have been on drugs when they did this, because it does have that sort of vibe of weird and way out with the space station. And at the end, where Fab One drifts away from the space station and when Alan tumbles back down to Tracy Island, it's quite a weird sequence, but it's cheesy as hell. But it sort of works as a respite from the action. Zero X is on his way to Mars, and you have a little gap before you get back into the drama. Watching it again yesterday afternoon, it was a really good, fun time. As I always say about these things that I revisit after years and years, they're just huge nostalgia fixes, and they bring back so many memories of being a massive Thunderbirds fan. I had the comics, I had the toys, I had the costume. There is, in fact, a picture of me and a friend of mine in international rescue costumes, but I don't think I'll be showing you that one today. This has a slightly sad connection as well, because a best friend of mine at the time I was in school with, and I knew right through the rest of his life, he passed away a few years ago. He was lucky enough to be bought by his parents the huge Zero X model that came together as like, not exactly a kit, but it was in 4 or 5 parts. The body, the module, the cone, the wings. This was a big piece of toy kit. And I remember we were playing with this on the carpet of his house in Cardiff and rolling it around and recreating the adventures and things. And that's what I like about doing some of these videos. It brings back those fantastic memories, personal memories, not just memories of enjoying a film or buying a comic, but memories that you can specifically connect to people who, in the case of my friend, are no longer with us. But it's a great fun film. The effects are fantastic. I mean, again, watching it yesterday, you sort of think, this is, they were doing this in the 60s, the pure artistry of creating these models and moving them on wires and jets. And it's a technical achievement which boggles the mind, really, for the 1960s. There was a Thunderbirds TV series not so long ago, which was CGI. And I saw some of it, and it didn't have, good as it was, it didn't have the charm, I suppose, of the original Thunderbirds series. You know, that wasn't aimed at me, but obviously if you're doing a new Thunderbirds thing, you're going to have some sort of connection back to the original audience. It's a bit like Doctor Who. When Doctor Who came back in 2005, part of its remit was to bring back people who'd watched it originally and remind them that this is part of your childhood, but look, it's new and modern and fresh. And I don't think the Thunderbirds CGI series quite did that. But this is, for all its faults and its pacing issues and its weirdness and the predictability of the storyline completely, it's great fun. It really is hugely enjoyable. The ending is a hoot, because Lady Penelope does take Alan out to the real Shooting Star nightclub, and he discovers that the rest of the team are all there in ridiculous disguises. He's got a little blonde moustache, because International Rescue can be recognised in public, and then he turns around and everybody else is there. They all got beards and wigs. It's just lunacy, but it's just charming. And that's the thing about this film. It is a charming period piece, hugely spectacular, hugely entertaining, and I think it's been unfairly maligned over the years. And having watched it yesterday for the first time in years, I thought it was really enjoyable. What happened to the film, though? Well, as I said, the film was released in December 1966. I think it was intended to be like a big hit over the Christmas period. It was Thunderbirds on the big screen. And there is quite a well-known anecdote where Gerry Anderson, at the film's premiere, glitzy, Leicester Square premiere, one of the distributors of the film, I think, came up to him at the end of the night and said, "Gerry, I can't decide if this film is going to be as big a hit as Bond or bigger than Bond. This is going to be huge." And Gerry and Sylvia went away very excited, thinking, wow, career in films beckons. And then over the next few days, reports came back that the cinemas were virtually empty. 10 seats here, 5 seats there. Film didn't find an audience, which is quite bizarre. And I think all the post-mortems afterwards came to the conclusion that why would people go to the cinema to see something they could watch at home? Thunderbirds was still running at the time on TV. People must have thought, well, I can watch this for nothing on television. Why do I want to pay to see it in the cinema? So I think that people perhaps thought, well, this is a TV series. Why do I want to see it on the big screen? I don't think the reviews were hugely glowing. That might have put some people off, as it does today. I don't think the film turned a profit. Weirdly, you'd think it would have done reasonably well, but apparently not. However, the studio felt that there was potential in a Thunderbirds feature film. The second series of Thunderbirds was in production. As I mentioned, that only ran to 6 episodes. Again, I think this was because Lou Grade had realised he wasn't going to sell it to a big American network. There wasn't big money to be made. So after 6 episodes, the plug was pulled on Thunderbirds, and Gerry and Sylvia were told to develop a new series, which would become Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. There was, however, another Thunderbirds film which came out a couple of years later. It was called Thunderbirds 6. I will review this at some point in the future. Now, the strange thing about Thunderbirds 6, I've seen that film umpteen times. Even now, I can't tell you exactly what it's about. I know that there's some sort of biplane, which is the 6th Thunderbird vehicle. And I know there's a sequence at the end that was filmed on the M4 motorway over the bypasses. But I can't remember. I can never remember anything about that film. It's really weird. Thunderbirds Go very firmly imprinted on my brain, but I cannot remember Thunderbirds 6. So when I get to watch it again, it'll be almost like a new experience. Thunderbirds Go then came out, as I said, in December 1966, and it was quite well promoted, really. It featured on the cover of TV Century 21, the fantastic 1960s comic. It was part of the Gerry Anderson universe at the time. They had all this stuff of TV shows and toys and comics and books, and it featured on the cover of TV 21. There was a paperback adaptation. I had so many of these things over the years, they disappeared in the midst of time. One of my treasured possessions for many years was this large format souvenir book, which cost 3 and 6. That was a lot of money at the time, which went into great detail about the making of the film, behind the scenes and who's involved in it. Beautiful book. Again, this disappeared somewhere years ago, and these are things I'm going to try and get hold of in a few months' time, because I really love to see these things again, because as the world gets darker and scarier, it's nice to hang on to things from the past. Zero X also had an afterlife beyond Thunderbirds. Now, the Anderson universe wasn't very well connected. I think these days, when you think of the MCU and how things all connect and they all link up and there are references to one another, that wasn't really a thing back in the Gerry Anderson days. There were vague references in the comics, the Stingray being at the same time period as Thunderbirds and so on, but there were no efforts to do crossovers or connections and things. But as part of the promotion for the film, in issue 105 of TV 21 comic, a new Zero X strip was launched based on the further exploits of the astronauts aboard the ship and their adventures. And the first story was called Return to the Red Planet, which ran between issues 105 and 109, which took Zero X back to Mars to meet up with those fiery rock snakes all over again. The comic strip continued for several years, in fact, in TV 21. It continued for 137 issues, and it finished with the comic itself in issue 242. And the strip, from what I recall and what I've read, seemed to develop into more of a space adventure, a bit like Fireball XL5. Now, bearing in mind that Zero X on the film was travelling to Mars for the first time, in the comic strip they venture out into space and they have more wild adventures with different types of aliens. But even that wasn't the end of the connections, because in Countdown comic, issue number 32, which I have here, many of you will remember the fantastic Countdown comic, this beautifully printed comic in a format called Photogravatura, I believe it's called. Glossy, slick comic that came out in February 1971. And this is a comic which had, of course, the classic John Pertwee Doctor Who comic strips and a lot of Gerry Anderson material. There were also sort of features about the space race and so on. Stingray comic strips. I think these were reprinted from TV 21. They also had UFO comic strip, which at the time didn't mean much to me because I hadn't seen UFO, but these of course have all been republished since. And they also had an original brand new Captain Scarlet story, which was called Return of the Rock Snakes, which of course featured the return of the Rock Snakes from the film from 5 years earlier. So Thunderbirds Go, and indeed the Rock Snakes from Thunderbirds Go, had an afterlife way beyond the film, which didn't connect at the time. Thunderbirds Go is on YouTube at the moment. That's where I watched it yesterday. I think Thunderbirds 6 is there too. It is, of course, available on DVD and on Blu-ray, so you can get your own shiny copies of it. And I think it might be on ITVX too. So not hard to find these films if you want to find them. And if you're a fan of Anderson, I think we're all conscious of faults with certain Anderson productions looked at today. I mean, Captain Scarlet is so humorless and so dour. Joe 90 is bizarre. This 10-year-old kid who basically goes on assassinating and killing people and becoming a spy. Secret Service this was the last film to use supermarination, was pretty much unwatchable, which is why it was cancelled after 13 episodes. And even My Beloved UFO, I can't argue against the fact that there's a certain stiffness in the characters and scripts. But I think watching any Anderson show, if you're a fan at the time, you will turn your back on those faults because they are just such fun. And they bring back so many great memories of being a child in the 60s and having your imagination blown open by shows like this, that for all the artifice of the things that are around today that kids can watch, we had shows made for us like this back in the 60s, and that was just incredible. As a rating then, having watched Thunderbirds Are Go yesterday, I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. And I was just thrown back to the 60s as a child, completely entranced by this crazy, odd, mad concoction of action and adventure, strange surreal musicality and wackiness, strangeness. And things like this I love to watch because they just fling me right back to the 60s and simpler, easier days. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, if you're new here, please like and subscribe. There will be more Anderson content to come. Be assured of that. And of course, if you want one of these fabulous t-shirts, there's a link in the description. Right, I will see you soon. Until I do, well, as the man said,